So, so that's pretty plain. You're a dead man if you don't take her back to her husband and her family. I'd have no idea why he did that. It doesn't, he did it once. He wouldn't. I guess it worked so well the first time. He's going to do it again. So in verses 8 through 10, as soon as I flip the page, in verse 8, now behold, I have 2 daughters. Let me get in verse 20, chapter 20, sorry. I'll get myself together here in a minute. Verse 8 of chapter 20. So Abimelech arose early in the morning and called his servants and told all these things in their hearing. The men were greatly frightened, and Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us, and how have I sinned against you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things that ought not to have been done. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what have you encountered that you have done this thing? And I'm going to stop there for a second. Abimelech, he's not going to waste any time. Once God tells him, if you don't do what's right, you're a dead man. And he would do like every one of us in here. He was quickly moved to action. And he was quickly got up. He quickly is confronting Abraham. He's talking to his people, telling them what is happening. So Abimelech didn't waste any time, verse 8, in dealing with those. He rose up early. He gathered all his servants of his house. He gives them a warning that God gave him. And the news, if you were listening to this, if you were Abimelech's people, you'd be terrified, and they were terrified. Abimelech confronts Abraham now in verse 9. He was direct. He was to the point with him. He didn't beat around the bush. He gets to the very heart of the matter. He asked Abraham, what have you done to us? That's a pretty good question, isn't it? What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you? He says, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin. What have you encountered that you have done this thing? Verse 10, what have I done to you? In other words. So Abimelech tells Abraham in verse 9, this ought not to be done. You shouldn't have done this. It's not right. Here he is telling a man of God, what you did is wrong. This is I don't know, he's a heathen, and he's saying this to Abraham. Well, that's a great example, isn't it? So after explaining his fear to Abimelech, he explains Sarah is his sister, verse 12. So now Abraham's going to pass the buck in verse 13. He passes the buck. We tend to do that. He says, God caused me to wander. Yeah, God caused you to wander. He's gone from Ur of Chaldees all the way to where he is now, and you can trace his route by the altars that he built. But God didn't cause him to say this. But he's using that as an excuse. He's trying to switch the blame to Almighty God. To me, he does this instead of owning up to his mistake and apologizing to the man. So, verse 14. Abimelech then took sheep and oxen and male and female servants and gave to Abraham and restored his wife Sarah to him. And Abimelech said to him, behold, my land is before you. Settle wherever you please. And to Sarah he said, behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is your vindication before all who are with you, before all men you are cleared. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, and so they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast the wombs of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Oh, stop there for a second. Look back at 14. Abimelech then took sheep. Do you remember what happened when he went to Egypt? And he said, she's my sister, and Pharaoh found out? Do you remember what Pharaoh did? He did the very same thing. He gave Abraham all this stuff. That's how one of the reasons Abraham accumulated all of the stuff and things, herds and cattle and money and everything. And so here you see Abimelech took his sheep and his oxen, and it's interesting to me that even though it's Abraham who deceived him, it wasn't Abimelech. But Abimelech has given him these gifts of herds and servants and land and 1,000 pieces of silver in verse 16. And he gives Sarah back to Abraham. It was all due to God, not Abraham. God had Abimelech do this. And so he's doing this. He's making, he's giving him stuff. He's giving him an offering. And another reason it's all due to God is because Abraham is a prophet. Abimelech wants to make it right, and Abimelech wants Abraham to pray for him, his ability to restore Abimelech and his family and all the women. So Abimelech met God's conditions in verse 17 and 18. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, so that they bore children. The Lord had closed fast all the wounds of the household of Abimelech, because Sarah, Abraham's wife. So he couldn't wait to give those gifts to Abraham and make amends, even though he wasn't guilty. And so Abraham prays for him. Abraham, as God's prophet, prayed for Abimelech and his household. They were barren. The women were barren. I guess if I could think of one thing that we would get from this is just me. You may have others. But to me, our sin can affect everybody, can affect others. What we do can affect other people. And I think that's a lesson we see here and we learn here. Yes, sir? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's brought us chaos that we have on our streets and in our homes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, he had no faith. He said he didn't think God is in that place. God is everywhere. I don't know why he would think that, but he thought that. And so because he thinks in his mind that God is not in this place, that he had to do something wrong to protect himself, even though he really put Sarah in a terrible position, put her in a bad place. He thinks, I don't know if he thinks, I won't say it that way, but maybe he has an indication, maybe he has a thought that God's promises to him to make him a great nation and all the people of the earth will be blessed with just for him. And it wasn't. It was a package. It was for Sarah too. It's for him and Sarah, not him and someone else. Maybe he forgot that. I don't know. Thank you. Did we talk about the way you want to? You satisfied? Okay. All right. We'll move on. Chapter 21. Now Isaac is going to be born. The promise is going to be fulfilled. Verse 21, chapter 21, verses 1 through 3. Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time in which God had spoken to him. Remember when, well, we'll get there in a minute. We'll talk about that. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. I'm going to stop there. God is a perfect promise keeper, isn't he? He keeps his promise. I mean, he told Abraham, Sarah's going to have a child this time next year. He keeps his promise. He kept his promise both to Abraham and Sarah to give them a child in their old age. You see that in chapter 18, verse 1 through 5. Thankfully, God is not like man. He is faithful. He is faithful to his promises. His promises are sure and steadfast. Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. Hebrews 11 and verse 11. I love that in Hebrews. Hebrews 11 and verse 11 says, by faith, even Sarah herself received the ability to conceive, even beyond her proper time. Isn't that the truth? Since she considered him faithful who has promised. It's a great verse. So it was God who gave her strength. It was God who gave her the ability to conceive well beyond her age to do so. It was God that fulfilled his will through Abraham and Sarah. It was accomplished just exactly the way God said it would. Remember, because of her lack of faith, what did she do? When she was first heard the news that she was going to have a child, and she's 90 years old at that time, what did she do? She laughed. And she reminds me of my mother. My mother didn't laugh. She always, like that kind of and covered up her mouth. I see Sarah do that. She don't want to laugh too loud. Don't want nobody to hear, but that's no good because God heard it. The Lord heard it. She thought it was impossible. But nothing is impossible to God. It don't matter. The time that we live in is terrible. You feel like you can't even go to Dallas without getting your car shot at. And all these terrible things are happening every day. But listen, God keeps his promises. And he will keep his promise. So God gave her strength to conceive beyond her old age. And it was accomplished just exactly in the time and the way God said it would. Remember, because of her lack of faith, and she thought it was impossible and that God needed help to complete this plan. Do you remember what she did? Yeah, she went to her handmaid. What was her name? Hagar, yeah. Went to Hagar and said, look, you go into my husband. Then she went to her husband and said, the only way God's promises are going to be fulfilled is it's going to have to be through Hagar. She's thinking physical. She's not thinking spiritual, is she? So she goes to Hagar, and Hagar goes into Abraham, and they have a child by the name of Ishmael. And so what she thought was impossible, that God needed help to complete his plan, and God's plan didn't fit her thinking. That's the thing. Does God's plan sometimes not fit our thinking? We don't think like God does, do we? His thoughts are beyond our thoughts. His plans are beyond our plans. His home in heaven that he has for us is beyond our comprehension. We can't comprehend that. We can't physically understand it. So you know what he has to do in Revelations? He has to give us examples. Gates of pearl, streets of gold, river of life. That's the only way we're able to see the concept. But it's way more than that. Heaven is way more than that. But this didn't fit her thinking. God didn't need her help. And she's the one that caused all this problem and heartache. It's her fault. God's plan and promises are sure, and they're steadfast. And Sarah's lack of faith didn't cause God to change his plan. That's the main thing. He keeps his plan. He keeps His promise. He is faithful to the end. Even when who is not? Who is not? We are. Even when we're not faithful, He keeps His plan. Abraham names the child Isaac just as God commanded him in chapter 17 and verse 19. Just exactly what God said. So verses 4 through 7, here we go, trouble coming. Now, well, in a minute. 4 through 7. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born to him. Man, I worry about my son is 41. Is he 40? The youngest one. 40, and he had his first child, and we told him, man, he's going to be in a nursing home when his child's in high school. But here, Abraham's 100 years old. When Isaac was born, and Sarah said, God made laughter for me. And she did, didn't she? She laughed in that tent. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on that day. And Isaac was weaned. And then we're going to see problems. Verse 4. When Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, he was 8 days old. Isaac is circumcised just the way God commanded in Genesis 17 and verse 11. It's a sign of the covenant that God made with Abraham. Abraham had already done this, all the males and all of his household. Abraham, now we see, is 100 years old when Isaac is born. In verse 6, Sarah said, God has made me laugh, has made me laughter, made laughter for me. I'll get it right in a minute. And then everyone who hears will laugh with me. We did this morning, didn't we? Didn't we laugh this morning? We put a smile on our face, just like she said. Generations and thousands of years before, and we still laugh about it. Remember when Sarah listened when the Lord talked and the angels were with Abram? So she couldn't believe that would be possible. So Sarah continues on, verse 7. Who would have said that Abraham and Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne a son in my old age? Abraham is 100, but Sarah is no spring chicken either. She's about 90, somewhere like that. We all, especially women, they can understand Sarah's humor here. I know you can. Probably better than I can or any man can. You see her humor. But she was realizing here the power of God. Now we have trouble, verses 8 through 11. Or let's start verse 9. Well, I might do verse 8 again. The child grew and was weaned. You need to see that. This was a great day of celebration. The child is being weaned. And so Abraham prepares this great feast. It's a great thing. They want to celebrate the growing of this child, going from one stage in life to the another stage in life. But the celebration has a dark cloud on the horizon. It's going to rear its ugly head in verse 9. Now Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham. What's he doing? He's mocking. He's a teenage boy and he's mocking. You can't help but think to yourself, Sarah saw this. And all of this we see. And Sarah is the typical mother. You laugh at my son? You go to a baseball game, and if you make fun of this child's son, who you going to see next? Mama. She's going to be there. And this is the same way, the same attitude. Sarah can't help but think to herself, Sarah caused all this, didn't she? It was her idea from the beginning. Take my handmaid so we can have this child. So Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac. Ishmael's about, 13, 14 years old. He's mocking the future father of the nations that Sarah gave birth to, and that is God's promise. Verse 10, therefore she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son. Ooh. We can tell she comes right straight to Abraham. You tell Abraham, or she tells Abraham, to drive out Hagar, the Ishmael, out. The whole matter is distressing to Abraham. You know how he feels in verse 11. She put stress on him, no doubt, because Abraham didn't see this coming. But God sees the stress that Abraham's under too. Verse 12 and 13. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed. She sees the stress because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendants shall be named, and the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. What do you see there? What is God telling Abraham? Don't be distressed. I got a handle on this. It's you and Sarah's fault, but I will work through this, and my will's still going to be accomplished. I'm going to take care of all this, he's saying. God always has a plan. He has a plan for eternity to accomplish his will for man, to send Jesus Christ into the world to save us from sin. And nothing man can do to alter this plan. It is God's permanent plan. So God once again intervenes. He comes to assistance. He continues to fulfill his promise to Abraham. He first eases his stress, to ease his grief and all this. Abraham couldn't change the past, so we too have to remember this. It's no good to grieve over past mistakes and sin, is it? It's over. We repent. God forgives. He still uses us as his instruments, and we have to let things go sometime and not look back, but look forward. How do I know that? Because Paul said, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, or something like that. Forgetting what lies behind, reaching forward to what lies ahead. So we don't look back either. And God reminded Abraham that Ishmael was the seed of Abraham too, and he would make him a great nation, even though he's not in the chosen line that God has selected, even though he is not God's chosen to bring Jesus Christ into the world. He is not that person, but God's still going to take care of him. So verse 14. Well, I turn the page and it's sticking together. Verse 14. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and he took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar and put them on her shoulder and gave her the boy and sent her away, as she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes, and then she went and sat opposite him about a bow shot away. For she said to him, do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him and lifted up her voice and wept. I'm going to stop there a second. So Abraham, he quickly obeyed God. He did exactly what God said, and that wasn't hard. I mean, that wasn't easy, was it? It was hard. It was on his heart. And he rose early, and I'm sure he told them what he was going to do with them. And he gave them food and water and put it on her shoulder, gave her Ishmael, and sent them off into the wilderness, which is still a wilderness to this day. I'm sure that it was hard for him to expel them. Ishmael was his son. And we see here an amazing commitment to follow God's command. Verse 15, when the water in the skin was used up, now we see the situation take a different turn, don't we? The worst thing that could happen, no water, no food. So Hagar quickly gives up. Ishmael, she leads him under some bushes. She sat opposite him in verse 16, about a bow shot away. She didn't want to see the boy die. She didn't want to see it. And she lifted up her voice and wept. In verse 17 through 19, verse 17, God heard the lad crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. Our Father in heaven heard Ishmael's crying. Angel of God said to Hagar, "What's the matter with you?" The angel doesn't wait for an answer. In verse 18, God again is keeping his promise to Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation. And in verse 19, then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. I don't know if the well of water was always there and she couldn't see it, or boom, there was a well of water. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Either way, she sees it now. He opened her eyes. Hagar had given up hope for her and her son. And like any mother, she takes care of Ishmael first with the water. She gave him water first before she drank any water. That's a love of a mother, isn't it? It's a wonderful thing. Verse 20 and 21. God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer and lived in the wilderness of Paran. And his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt, because that's where she's from. That's how Abraham got her, was in Egypt. So many today do not like Ishmael because we don't get choice in parents, do we? Ishmael was a result of lack of faith. Decision by Sarah and Abraham he's still Abraham's son, and God is going to take care of him. Not his son of choice. He is not the chosen one to bring salvation into the world. God promises to Hagar and Ishmael, make him a great nation. God keeps his promise. He lives in the wilderness as an archer. I guess that means he's a hunter with a bow and arrow. Any final comments? I'm glad to see everyone. We'll pick it up there next time.